Good morning, everyone. And I am Charlotte Esquadra, and we are Group 4, which will discuss about Chapter 4, Entering and Contracting. So, in this chapter, we'll describe the issues associated with entering into an audit process and also describe the issues associated with contracting for an audit process. So, in entering and contracting, there are three things we need to consider, such as entering into an OD relationship, developing contract, and also interpersonal process issues in entering and contracting. But then I'm going to discuss the first one, which is entering into an audio relationship. And in chapter 2, by the way, it describes also plan change process that generally starts when one or more managers or administrators sense an opportunity for their organization, department, or group believe that new capabilities need to be improved through organization development. So the organization might success yet have room for improvement. It might be facing competitive conditions that necessitate a change in how to operate. The organization could be experiencing problems such as poor product quality, high rates of absenteeisms, or dysfunctional conflicts among departments. So, conversely, the problems might appear more diffuse and consist simply of feelings that the organization should be more innovative, more competitive, or more effective. So, entering and contracting are the initial steps in the OD process. They involve defining in a preliminary manner the organization's problem or opportunities for development and establishing a collaborative relationship between the OD practitioner and members of the client system about how to work on those issues. It also sets the initial parameters for carrying out the subsequent phases of OD, such as diagnosing, planning, and implementing changes, and also evaluating and institutionalizing them. They help to define what issues will be addressed by those activities, who will carry out, and how they will be accomplished. Another thing is entering and contracting can vary in a complexity and formality depending on the situation. So we have here two common situations. Like the first one is those cases where the manager of a work group or department serves as his or her own audit practitioner. So, entering and contracting typically involve the manager and group members meeting to discuss what issues to work on and how they will jointly meet the goals they set. So, here, entering and contracting are relatively simple and informal since they are in one group only. Then they involve all relevant members directly in the process with a minimum of formal procedures. But another situation is where the managers and administrators are considering the use of professional OD practitioners. So, either from inside or from outside the organization, entering and contracting tend to be more complex and formal. Like OD practitioners may need to collect preliminary information to help define the problematic or development issue, and also they may need to meet with representatives of the client organization rather than with the total membership. They may need to formalize their respective rules and how the change process will unfold. And also, they may need to gain an understanding of the power dynamics in the client organization and how they are likely to affect the OD process. So, in these cases where the anticipated changes are strategic and large in scale, formal proposals from multiple consulting firms may be requested and legal contracts drawn up. So, in this chapter, first discusses the activities and content oriented issues involved in entering into and contracting for an OD initiative. So the focus is on complex processes involving OD professionals and client organization. So similar entering and contracting issues, however, need to be addressed in even the simplest OD efforts, where managers serves as OD practitioners for their own work units. Unless there is clarity and agreement about what issues to work on, who will address the how that will be accomplished, and what timetable will be followed. Subsequent stages of the audit process are likely to be confusing and ineffective. So this chapter concludes with a discussion of the interpersonal process issues involved in entering and contracting for OD work. So now I'm going to discuss the first thing, so which is entering into an OD relationship. So an OD process generally starts when a member of an organization or unit contacts an OD practitioner about potential help in addressing an organizational issue. The organization member may be a manager, self specialist, or some other key participants, such as the practitioner may be an OD professional from inside or outside of the organization. Like determining whether the two parties should enter into an OD relationship typically involves clarifying the nature of the organization's current functioning and also the issues to be addressed, like the relevant client systems for that issues. The OD practitioner may need to collect preliminary data about the organization. So similarly, the organization may need to gather information about the practitioner's competence and experience. This knowledge will help both parties determine whether they should proceed to develop a contract for working together. So, in this section, it describes the activities involved in entering all the relationship, which is first clarifying the organizational issue. Second one is you need to determine the relevant client. And the third one is selecting the appropriate OD practitioner. So, in clarifying the organizational issue, when seeking help from OD practitioner, organizations typically start with a presenting problem, the issue that has caused them to consider an OD process. It may be specific like decreased market share, increased absenteeism, or general like we're growing too fast or we need to prepare for rapid changes. So the presentation problem often has an implied or stated solutions. Like for example, managers may believe that because costs are high, laying off members of their department is the obvious answer. But they may even state the presenting problem in the form of solutions like we need to downsize our organization, something like that. So in many cases, however, the presenting problem is only a symptoms of an underlying problems. For example, high costs may result from several deeper causes or including ineffective new product development or manufacturing process. Inappropriate customer service, the organization or department must be classified early in the OD process so that subsequent diagnostic and intervention activities are focused correctly. So in gaining clearer perspective on the organizational issue, uh, it may require collecting preliminary data. OD practitioners often examine company records and interview a few key members to gain an introductory understanding of the organizations, its context, and the nature of the presenting problem. So those data are gathered in a relatively short period, typically over a few hours to 1 or 2 days. They are intended to provide enough rudimentary knowledge of the organizational issue to enable the two parties to make informed choices about proceeding with the contracting process. So, the diagnostic phase of OD involves a far more extensive assessment of the problematic or development issue than occurs during the entering and contracting stage. You may check it in chapter 5 in this book. And also, the diagnosis might discover other issues that need to be addressed, or it might lead to redefining the initial issue that was identified during the entering and contracting stage. Like this prime example of the emergent nature of the audit process. Things may change as new information is gathered and new events occur. And next is the determining the relevant client. So a second activity in entering sorry. A second activity in entering an audio relationship is defining the relevant client for addressing the organizational issue. Well, generally, the relevant client includes those organization members who can directly impact the change issue, whether it is solving a problem or or improving an already successful organization or department. Unless these members are identified and included in the entering and contracting process, they may withhold their support for and commitment to the audit process. So, in trying to improve the efficiency of the company's supply chain, for example, the relevant client may need to include representatives of external suppliers. Well, it is not unusual for an audit project to fail because the relevant client was inappropriately defined. But determining also the relevant client can vary in complexity depending on the situation. In those cases where the organizational issue can be addressed in a specified organization unit, client definition is relatively straightforward. Members of the unit constitute the relevant client. They or their representatives must be included in the entering and contracting process. So, in this situation, for example, if a manager asked for help in improving the decision making process of his or her team, the manager in choosing an OD practitioner and defining the subsequent change process, there is a little likelihood that OD will improve team decision making. And also, determining the relevant client is more complex when the organizational issue cannot readily be addressed in a single unit. Here, it may be necessary to expand the definitions of the client to include members from multiple units, from different hierarchical level, and even from outside of the organization. So, in this situation, for example, the manager of a production department may seek help in resolving conflict between his or her unit and the other departments in the organization. The relevant client would extend beyond the boundaries of the production department because that department's involved in the conflict as well as the executive to whom all the department report. If the interdepartmental conflict also involved key customers from outside of the firm, the relevant client might include them. Well, in such complex situations, OD practitioners need to gather additional information about the organization to determine the relevant client. So generally, as part of the preliminary data collections that typically occurs when clarifying the issue to be addressed. So when examining companies' records or interviewing personnel, Practitioners can seek to identify the key members and organization units that need to be involved. So, for example, they can ask organization members questions such as who can directly influence the organizational issue, or who has vested interest in it, or who has power to improve or reject the OD effort. Well, the answer to those questions can help determine who is the relevant client for the entering and contracting stage. However, the client may change during the later stages of the OD process as new data gathered and change occurs. If so, participants may have to return and modify this initial stage of the OD process. So, what about the last part? So, last activity involved in the entering an OD relationship is selecting an OD practitioners who has the expertise and experience to work with members on the organizational issues. So, unfortunately, little systematic advice is available on how to choose a competent OD professional, whether from inside or outside of the organization. To help lower the uncertainty of choosing from among external OD practitioners, organization may request that formal proposals be submitted. In these cases, the OD practitioner must take all the information gathered in the prior steps and create an outline of how to process might unfold. So, it suggested that written proposal include project objectives, outlines of proposed processes, a list of rules and responsibilities, commented interviews, and proposed fees and expenses like this in this table. So these are the key elements of such proposal. So the late Gordon Levitt, uh, a pioneering practitioner in the field, suggested several criteria for selecting, evaluating, and developing audit practitioners. So, yeah, he suggested that the ability to form interpersonal relationship, the OD practitioners have the degree of focus on the problem, with the skills of practitioner relative to the problem, the extent that the consultant clearly informed the client as to his or her role and contribution, and also whether the practitioner belongs to a professional association. So, references from other clients are highly important, and a client may not like the consult. Like a client may not like the consultant's work, but it is critical to know the reasons for both pleasures and displeasure. Like one important consideration is whether the consultant approaches the organization with openness and an insistence or diagnosis, or whether the practitioner appears to have a fixed program that is applicable to almost any problem or organization. So we will find also in the chapter 3 that describes that OD consulting is as much as person specialization as it is a task specialization. So the OD professionals needs not only a repertoire of technical skills but also the personality and interpersonal competence to use himself or herself as an instrument of change. So regardless the technical training, uh, regardless of technical training, The consultant must be able to maintain the boundary positions, coordinating among various units and departments and mixing disciplines, theories, technology, and research finding is an organic rather than in a mechanical way. So the practitioner is potentially the most important OD technology available. Thus, in selecting an OD practitioner, perhaps the most important issues is the fundamental question: how effective has the person been in the part, with what kinds of organizations, or using what kinds of techniques? So, the task of choosing an effective audit practitioner should not rest entirely with the client organizations. Consultants also bear a heavy ethical responsibilities in finding whether there is a match between their skills and knowledge and what the organization or department needs. So few managers are sophisticated enough to detect or to understand subtle differences in expertise among OD professionals. And they often do not understand the difference between intervention specialties. Thus, practitioners should help educate potential clients, being explicit about their strengths and weaknesses and the range of competencies. So, if OD professionals realize that a good match does not exist, well, then they should inform the client and help them find more suitable help. So, in we will find our book, the application 4.1, which describes an entering process at Europharmaceutical, a global health care organizations. So the entry process was largely virtual in that the OD practitioner worked through to company representatives on a different continent. The applications highlights how OD work can come in different forms and through different channels. So it also reflects how quickly the entry process can occur. But then our next reporter will continue the application. Will discuss and continue the applications with the contracting based on the next topic. So this is the end of my report. Thank you, everyone.